Story 1. A little background before I start. I live in Sri Lanka and I'm 22 years old. I am currently an undergraduate at a local private university studying software engineering. To relieve some of the stress from my studies and work, I work as a freelancer while I study. I usually have 2 large cans of beer every Saturday night. Also, it's important to mention that I don't cut my beard because, once I shave it off, I end up looking like a 5th grader literally. So, I only trim it. However, last week I had to cut my beard because my mom had a Sinhala and Tamil New Year party with many celebrities in attendance. She's a former celebrity herself. She decided not to take me with her unless I shaved my beard. I'm not sure why, but she doesn't like it. This detail is important to the story. As usual, last Saturday, I went to buy some beer from a local supermarket in my area. I headed to the counter of the liquor section, but there was no cashier present. This is common since most people don't buy liquor in the middle of the day. There's a bell to call the cashier, so I rang it. A guy from another section yelled out to me to wait a second, so I waited with the 2 beers in my hands. While I was standing there, I felt a little itch on my chin, so I briefly removed my mask to scratch it. At the same moment, a middle-aged woman walked by. Once I was done, I put my mask back on and looked up, only to see her staring at me as if I were committing a crime. Even with her mask on, I could see the anger in her eyes. She passed by without taking her eyes off me. I tried to look away to avoid her stare, but I could still feel her gaze from the corner of my eye. Fortunately, she moved on to the front counter. I had to wait another 5 minutes before the cashier returned. After paying for the beers, I took them to the security desk where I had left my bag. While walking there, I noticed 2 police officers outside the store door with that same lady. I didn't think much of it since I wasn't doing anything wrong. I put the beers inside my bag and headed outside, but suddenly the 2 police officers stopped me. Officer 1, young man, please come with us. I obliged and went with them to the other side of the store's parking lot. The lady followed us, and I was confused about what was happening. Officer 2, may we check your bag? Me, still confused, yeah, sure. Officer 1 took my bag and pulled out the 2 beers. Officer 1, okay, here's the situation. You can't buy beer if you're underage. We'll need to take you to the police station and call your parents. Me, coming back to my senses, I'm not underage. I'm actually 22. Officer 1, come on, young man. You're clearly underage. Look, your aunt here said you're not of age. Me, looking at the lady, eh? What? Her? I don't even know her. Entitled lady, no, you know me. I'm your aunt. Insert someone else's name. Me, what? Officer 2, listen, young man. Please don't lie to us. Please provide your details. You're coming with us. Me, remembering I have my identification card in my wallet. Wait, you can't arrest me. Let me show you my ID. Officer 2, okay. Entitled lady, he probably took his dad's ID. I reached for my wallet and took out my identification card, handing it to Officer 1. He started to examine it. Officer 1, okay, you're of legal age. I'm sorry, Mr. Your name. You're free to go. Entitled lady, to Officer 1, I told you, this is his father's ID. I know this person. Grabs my identification card from Officer 1. Look. She turns the card to the side where my name, address, and date of birth are listed and shows it to Officer 2. Look, it says he was born in 1999, but look at him. He's clearly underage. Officer 1, ma'am, please don't grab things from an officer's hand. Entitled lady, I'm sorry. Just look at him. I don't want a minor to be doing this, especially since he's my nephew. Turns the card to the side where my photo is. Look, this isn't even him on the... A dead silence followed. She stared at the card for a few seconds, then at me. Again, she looked at the card, then back at me. Entitled lady, but... Officer 1, snatching the card from her and handing it back to me. You can leave. We're sorry for the confusion. Entitled lady? No, wait. But how? Officer 1. Shush. Ma'am, please walk away. He's not underage. I put the beers back into my bag and started to walk away. I could hear the entitled lady trying to convince the officers she was right. I didn't care, though. I was still confused. I didn't even know that person. But I figured it wasn't worth worrying about, so I headed straight home to relax with my 2 beers. So, if you're wondering why she got confused when she saw my ID photo, let me explain. In Sri Lanka, we receive our identification cards when we're about to face the General Certificate of Education Ordinary Level GCE All examination in grade 11. We're usually 16 years old at that time. When I got my ID, I was still in school, and our schools have strict rules, one of which is that we can't have beards. We must be clean-shaven before attending school. So, in my identification card photo, I was clean-shaven just like I looked that day. I looked exactly the same as I did in my ID photo. I think the entitled lady was trying to show the officers that I looked different in my ID photo, only to realize that I actually looked the same. Story 2. When I was 16, I met an older guy through some friends of mine. Let's call him Tom. He was 21 and had his own apartment. It was like we met and instantly started dating, which also meant becoming romantically involved. My parents weren't huge fans of his, but they are very open-minded and believe in letting their children learn from their own decisions and mistakes. We dated on and off for about 2 years. Tom worked odd jobs, but he had barely graduated from high school and admittedly wasn't very bright. In fact, he was kind of a jerk. He would call me names, make fun of me in front of his friends, or ignore me when I was upset. He also talked to other girls openly, but if I texted a guy from my band class, he would call me disrespectful names. I liked him because I was young and naive, and to my 16-year-old self, he was really good looking. It turned out Tom had a secret. He had joined the National Guard at 18, and after completing basic training, he got to go home for a short time because his mom was very sick. However, his mom recovered quickly, but Tom never informed the military. Instead, he frequently changed addresses and jobs so the military couldn't find him. Eventually, the janitorial company he worked for found out he was evading his duty and fired him. So, Tom became homeless. Guess who convinced her parents to let him stay with them for a while? That's right, me. I would get up and go to my senior year of high school while my 23-year-old boyfriend slept all day, hid from my dad, and did little else but drink. This continued for about a month. One day, Tom asked me to drive him to a friend's house, saying there was a party and that he would be staying in that town about a 15-minute drive for the night. I had school in the morning, and I had known these friends for years, so I said, "Bye, honey," and kissed him goodbye as he got out of my car. That was the last time I ever saw him in person. The next day, he told me he was going to continue drinking and stay in the other town with his friends. I was busy, so I just said whatever. It wasn't unlike Tom to drink for 3 days straight and then come home and crash. On the third day, his best friend called me and said, "Save all the elephants, Tom is cheating on you." He met Jane at my house party the other night and has been staying at her apartment, even though she knows about you. He told me he wasn't going to tell you and wanted to see how long he could get away with it. But I knew I had to tell you because you don't deserve that. I was very upset. He was my first boyfriend, and he had broken my heart. I called Tom and begged him to come back, but he refused. He said he was with Jane now and called me all sorts of mean names, saying we never really even dated. That's what he was telling Jane and her friends, that I just liked him. But we never actually dated. I called Jane and tried to talk to her, but she just kept calling me pathetic and insisted that I never dated Tom. Now, as I mentioned, Tom had lived with me, and everything he owned was at my parents' house, from snowboards to books to all of his clothes to some furniture. Literally everything this guy owned was at my house. When I was done being sad, I got mad. I called Tom on the 4th day and told him that all of his things were on my porch, and that he could come get them while I was at school. I said he had 1 day to get his stuff, or it would be gone. He laughed at me and said he would come get it soon. Well, I came home from school, and it was all still there. So I loaded everything up, cleats, a stereo, clothes, everything a person could own, into my car and brought it to a donation center. It took me and 2 workers about half an hour to unload it all. I think they thought someone had passed away because they didn't even ask why all of a person's belongings were being donated. The next day, Tom called me and said he was coming over and that I better not start any drama because he was bringing Jane to help him get his things. I told him not to bother because I had given it all away. He flipped out and screamed, calling me every name in the book, and sent Jane to my house alone to see if I was telling the truth. My dad told her to leave or he would make her leave himself. Tom called the police, and they laughed at him. They knew he was 23, had been absent without leave from the military, he had been arrested several times, and was staying with his 18-year-old girlfriend. Since it was a small town, they told him that if I had told him to come get his things, and he didn't, then it was his own fault. The friend who had called me originally was the one who drove Tom to the donation center. The employees there also laughed at him and wouldn't give him anything. Tom was also super broke, so he couldn't afford to buy anything back. The friend later told me that he had to act concerned while with Tom, but it was one of the funniest and most pathetic things he had ever seen, watching Tom beg the workers for his things back. I never saw Tom again, but I later heard he had gotten Jane pregnant twice. Eventually, she moved into a women's shelter temporarily, then gave the kids to her mom and checked into a mental health facility as a direct result of Tom's behavior. Last I heard, he was in jail again. Edit. Hey guys, I just realized that Tom was at my 18th birthday party. So, this happened shortly after my 18th, not my 17th birthday. So, it was actually more than 2 years that we dated. I was a senior when this happened, so yes, I remembered incorrectly earlier. It was a little more than 2 years. Also, I wasn't clear that he got arrested and served jail time. He was arrested for disorderly conduct, and they were going to release him after a night in the holding cell. But then the military police showed up. He left with them for a weekend, and they dishonorably discharged him. I can't remember specifically if that was why he was in jail, but he spent a few months in jail for it, and then really couldn't find a job after that. My dad has a huge heart and is constantly donating money and volunteering time. As much as he disliked Tom, he had nowhere to go, and my dad tried really hard to get Tom to sleep on the couch. But you know how teenagers are. I would sneak him upstairs, and eventually, my dad gave up. Tom probably only lived with us for 5 weeks. It wasn't months or years. Story 3. I used to do part-time volunteer work for a local park. The tasks were pretty basic, like picking up trash and providing light security, which mainly involved ensuring that people weren't damaging park property or reporting anything suspicious. The park was fairly large and had a jungle gym in the back, behind a wall of trees. One day, I noticed tire marks in the grass right where a turn leads out from the back. The turn was easy to make and didn't appear suddenly, so I was puzzled as to why someone would drive through the grass. The weather had been cold and muddy, so the tire marks were pretty much imprinted into the ground after the grass was run over. I called my supervisor, who said we would fix the area when it got a little warmer, which was expected later that week. A couple of days later, while I was near the front of the park patrolling, I noticed a minivan coming from the back of the park. It went right through the same area of the grass that had been previously run over. I couldn't believe I had just witnessed it happen again. The turn was clear, and anyone could see that going straight would lead through the grass. I started jogging toward the van, waving my arms to get the driver's attention. She stopped and rolled down her window, wearing thick sunglasses and looking at me with confusion at first. She also had 2 kids in the back. "Yes? What is it?" she asked. "Excuse me, miss. I'm one of the park workers. You drove straight through the grass back there. With how muddy it is, the grass gets damaged very easily," I explained. "Okay," she responded, clearly indifferent, which surprised me since she didn't even apologize. "Well, the grass will need to be restored. I understand if it was a mistake, but please be more careful when exiting from the back." I could tell she was giving me a dirty look. even though her large sunglasses covered most of her face. "Whatever," she said rudely and drove off toward the entrance after I stepped back from the van. Fast forward a couple of days, my supervisor and I had finished flattening the dirt and laying new seed for that area in the morning. I was quite pleased with how it turned out, and I was optimistic that the grass would look even better once it grew. Later that day, when I returned to patrol the park, I noticed the same minivan in the back parking lot. I headed over to the jungle gym area and, unsurprisingly, saw the entitled mother sitting on a bench, staring at her phone while her kids played. I hoped she had listened to me the previous day, but judging by her attitude, I was doubtful. I did a few walks around the back area, ensuring there wasn't any trash, and when I saw her tell the kids it was time to go, I quickly made my way to the front of the park. I stood in front of a car at the entrance and put on my sunglasses, which I kept in a fanny pack along with some medical supplies and my phone, hoping she wouldn't recognize me and would stay on the path, like how people slow down when passing a police officer on the road. As her van started approaching, I watched in disbelief as she once again didn't make the turn and went right through the same area we had just fixed that morning. I was really upset now. I walked up to her van, this time standing in the middle of the pavement, and she stopped as I approached, giving me a frustrated look. "Oh my goodness, what do you want now?" she exclaimed. "Miss, you ran over that area again. We just finished fixing it this morning, and you've already damaged it," I said. "So, it's just some grass. You should just make that whole area pavement so it won't get run over," she retorted. "You can clearly see the grass in front of you when you drive up from the back area. It doesn't appear out of nowhere, and you're the only one who's driven over it," I responded, my tone polite but clearly frustrated. Her kids, who seemed to be around 6 to 8 years old, were glued to their tablets and didn't pay much attention to our conversation, except when they heard their mother use impolite language. She gave me one more nasty look before rolling up her window and driving off. She didn't even respond to my last point. Also, she nearly ran over my foot as she didn't wait for me to back away from her van before driving off. That was the last straw for me. I called my supervisor again and explained what had happened. I could tell he was pretty upset over the phone, but he assured me that he had a plan to stop anyone from running over that area anymore. I met him on Friday morning, and he had a giant boulder in the back of his pickup truck. I instantly knew what we were going to do with it. After some work getting it down, digging up the dirt, and wedging it into place, we finished installing the boulder. I had to admit, it was a bit disappointing to see such an eyesore there, and all our previous work seemed wasted. But I was glad the entitled mother wouldn't be able to drive over that area again. Later that day, I was in the back picking up trash when I saw the same minivan pull into the parking lot. I recognized the entitled mother and her kids because I remembered their license plate this time. I paid no mind to them, confident that she wouldn't be able to run over the grass when they left. Later on, as I was cleaning some bird droppings off a statue, I heard a loud crash coming from the front. I ran over to where the noise came from, shocked to see the entitled mother's van with the giant boulder wedged between her tire and bumper. She got out of the van, clearly shocked at what had happened, and started shouting and swearing. I felt a twinge of guilt because I hadn't intended to damage her car just to prevent her from driving through the grass again. I walked over to the other side to see that the wheel was slightly off the ground, with the front bumper wedged atop the boulder. Honestly, I couldn't figure out how she managed that. When she saw me, her expression turned into one of pure, concentrated anger. You put that rock there, didn't you, jerk?" she yelled as she stomped toward me. "Miss, my supervisor brought that boulder in this morning because you kept running over the grass. I don't know how you even hit it since." Again, you could clearly see it coming from the back, I replied. "I was texting my friend. You jerk. You're going to pay for this damage," she shouted. "Yeah, I don't think so," I calmly responded. She fumed and headed back to her car, instructing her kids to sit at a nearby table, both still engrossed in their tablets. She then got back into the car and made a phone call. A few minutes later, she informed me that she had called the police and that I was going to be arrested for intentionally damaging her property. I admit I was a bit worried that her version of the story might not be truthful, so I called my supervisor again. He arrived even before the police did, laughing as he pulled up and saw the situation. He approached the entitled mother, explained who he was, and she started yelling at him about how she was going to sue and have both of us arrested for the damage. A few minutes later, the police arrived. She told them we had intentionally put the rock there to damage her car. However, we explained to the officers that she had driven over that grass several times, even after we had fixed it, and we put that boulder down to prevent her and others from driving through the grass. The police gathered more information from us, and then informed the entitled mother that we were within our rights to place the boulder there and were not responsible for her poor driving. Frustrated, she told her kids to get back in the car and attempted to back out off the boulder. My supervisor, the officers, and I all watched as the boulder scraped up the bottom of her car as she backed out. Once she was off it, her front bumper slammed onto the pavement and was now hanging off on the left side. Something under her car was also touching the pavement, which became apparent as she started to drive away, and the sound of something scraping against the road could be heard. The officers stopped her and told her that her car was no longer safe to drive on the road and that she needed to get it towed. My supervisor and I went home shortly after, smiling and laughing at what had happened that day. I can safely assume now that she won't be driving over that grass anymore. Story 4. Several years ago, my mom was a brand new flight attendant, fulfilling her dream job. She was heading to her gate, excited for her first ever flight as an attendant when she was stopped by our antagonist, Karen. The conversation went roughly as follows. Karen, excuse me. Mom, how may I help you? Karen, I need you to upgrade us to first class. Mom, I'm sorry, but you'll need to talk to the gate agent. I'm a flight attendant. Mom understood Karen's confusion because gate agents and flight attendants wear the same uniform. However, they are completely different departments. A gate agent can't do what a flight attendant can do and vice versa. Karen, I don't care. You're going to upgrade me to first class. Poking Mom in the chest, right? This moment. Enter our hero. My stepdad, who just so happened to be the captain of Mom's flight, was getting some coffee at a nearby shop and overheard Karen's entitled rant. He approached them. Stepdad, what seems to be the problem, ma'am? Karen, finally, I'm Karen, and I need to be put in first class on flight 123. Stepdad, that's my flight. I'll speak to the gate agent, but only after you apologize to my flight attendant for your entitled behavior, or I'll have you removed from my flight. Now, most people would agree to apologize, but as you can probably guess, Karen wasn't one of them. Instead, Karen did the most foolish thing you can imagine. She tried to punch my stepdad in the face. What Karen and Mom didn't know is that my stepdad is a Navy veteran who used to train fighter pilots and is in excellent shape. The next thing Mom knew, my stepdad had twisted Karen around, pinned her arms behind her back, and was calling for security. The flight ended up being delayed because Mom and stepdad were giving statements and agreeing to press charges. Karen ended up facing assault charges and was banned from the airline. That evening, once everything was wrapped up, my stepdad approached Mom again. The conversation went like this. Stepdad, hey, I wanted to apologize for that. I heard you're brand new, and I hope that didn't scare you off from your job. Mom, nah, I have 2 kids. It takes more than that to scare me. Stepdad, still, I want to make it up to you. Are you free this evening? I know a really great restaurant in town. Mom, I'd love to. A few years later, they got married. Story 5. A few years back, I was part of a youth group a few towns away from my own. My family would drop me off. I'd hang around town with friends afterward, and then take the train home. I was 14 or 15 at the time, so I still qualified for a child's ticket. However, since the cutoff for those tickets is 16, and I was traveling alone, there was a high risk of conductors questioning my age. My only form of identification was my passport, which I didn't regularly carry with me. Fortunately, even now in my 20s, I still look about 13, so most people wouldn't have thought 14-year-old me was anywhere close to being an adult. However, there was one time when a conductor questioned my age and refused to believe my answer. Cast, conductor and me. Conductor, how old are you? Me, 14. Conductor, what year were you born? Me, 1920. Conductor, do you have any ID on you? Me, no, sorry. Conductor, well, then I'm going to have to charge you for a full ticket. I briefly tried to explain that I shouldn't be charged for not carrying ID to prove I was young enough, something my parents had told me, although I wasn't sure if it was true. Surely giving my birth year should have been enough, since it had been enough for conductors in the past. However, he smugly cut me off. Conductor, it doesn't matter because I know you're lying about your age. Me, now defensive. I don't know how you can know that because I'm not. Conductor, pointing to something on my ticket. That number means it was bought with a credit or debit card. You can't have one of those if you're under 16. Me. No, you can. My bank has an account for those under 19 that you can get as young as 13. I can show you the website on my phone if you want. Conductor, now almost shouting and cutting me off again. I don't care about some website. You're lying about your age, and if you don't pay for a full ticket, I can have the transport police arrest you. Now, I was pretty sure that wasn't true, but at the time we were getting close to my stop. I was 14, barely over 5 feet tall, and very aware of the fact that there was no one else in the carriage, just me, and this large, older man shouting down at me. I was scared, so I just gave in and paid. It wasn't a lot, only £2 or £3, but I was a kid, and I was upset about what had happened. The conductor had one final remark. Conductor, besides, if you're not lying, the station can refund it if you prove you're under 16. But I don't think they'll believe your story about the bank either. With that, he smugly walked off, apparently satisfied with having reduced a teenager to tears over a few pounds. I was still a mess over it when I got home. My mom calmed me down and grabbed my passport as we were heading straight back to the train station for a family night out. At this point, you might guess where this is going. My stop had been the last one on the train I had taken home. By the time we returned, it had been moved onto the other track, and was the next train into the city, the train we were there to catch. We sat down, and because this train was much busier than the earlier one, we saw the conductor coming down the carriage long before he noticed us. It was the exact same conductor. My mum had started to take out our tickets, along with my ID just in case, and was surprised to see me suddenly digging in my pockets and pulling out my tickets from earlier. All I could say was, "That's the guy." But she got the message. She smiled and looked me in the eye, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. Eventually, the conductor reached us, with 2 piles of tickets on the table in front of us. He saw me, saw my parents, and saw the closed passport. His face went pale. In hindsight, he might have been worried he was about to get chewed out by my mum for daring to charge her child extra. That isn't what happened. Conductor, with some difficulty, can I check ID for the child ticket? Mum, in her equivalent of a customer service voice. Absolutely. Here you go. She opened my passport. He checked it, and I could see he realized he had made a mistake. Mum, still in charm mode. Oh, while we're here, my name was on earlier, and... She didn't get to finish. The conductor mumbled something like, "Yeah, I know, okay," before pulling out the money I had given him earlier. For all I know, it could have been the exact same coins, and sliding it across the table to me. I don't think I've ever enjoyed a train journey as much as that one. Edit. Some comments have mentioned that the conductor was just doing his job, even if he was a bit rude about it. I'm not saying he was wrong for being cautious about teenagers on trains. I'm saying he was wrong for outright stating that I was lying, and for his overall rude behavior. The revenge wasn't for what happened, but for the way it happened. Remember, if you're traveling without ID, be ready to pay extra and then get a refund at the station. Don't do what I did to undeserving railway workers. This was exclusively because he was being rude. Also, some people think this guy might have been running a scam and planning to keep the extra money since he still had the cash on him. When I say the money I gave him earlier, I don't mean it was likely the same cash. I just mean the full amount I had paid him. I joke that it might have been the exact same coins because the two incidents were less than an hour apart. He had the same cash belt on, and it was presumably part of the same shift. So I don't know that he would have cashed out between charging and refunding me. He did print off a separate ticket. The money was placed in his official work money belt, and everything was processed as far as I know. I don't think he was doing anything shady, just taking his job a bit too seriously, being misinformed, and possibly on a bit of a power trip. Story 6. Hello, everyone. It's the original poster here. When I'm not busy shaping minds, almost as cliché as the honeymoon is over, I work at your friendly neighborhood grocery store, managing the self-checkout stations. DJU scan in the house. When I'm overseeing customers scanning their own groceries, I usually stand at the entrance or exit of the self-checkout area. Being a former military member, I have a habit of standing at the entrance so I can face the store's doors. It just feels right, even if I'm just a cashier tonight. I noticed that the first self-checkout scanner was acting up, and I was about to walk over to shut it down. When it malfunctions, it takes a long time to fix, and customers often get frustrated. It's easier to shut it down rather than have customers follow a series of instructions that, if they fail to understand, force them to restart. It's a 5-minute process. So, as I'm walking toward the scanner, a man nearly elbows me out of the way and then jumps back exaggeratedly, saying, "Oh no, I guess you were here first, right, big guy?" I wasn't standing there waiting or anything, by all means. "No, I go first. I've been waiting." He then jumps back in front of me. It was almost like he was doing a dance routine, leaning in with his shoulder, then leaning back, then forward again. The only thing he was missing was a little shimmy. Let you go first? By all means, I thought. Enter the Master of Ceremonies, as played by me, endorsed by the Center for Disease Control. Just kidding. I, in a dramatic fashion, extended my arm, with a flourish, my freshly manicured hands pointing to the scanner, saying, "Be my guest." The funny thing is, there were about 3 customers behind this guy who had already checked out without any problems before he even tried to start scanning. It took even longer than I had anticipated. The man fumbled with his items, looked around for help, and muttered about how there's never anyone around who works there. He even glanced back at me and scoffed at me for watching. Finally, he angrily grabbed his items and got back in line. Picking up items he dropped one by one, like a classic comedy routine. Every time he bent down to pick up one thing, he dropped another. The more we tried to help, the angrier he got, so I just kept watching. As I walked toward the register, he muttered, "Oh, you're gonna cut in front of her now too." Finally, a lady in line chimed in. "He works here, he's trying to help," just as I shut down the scanner for a reset. The man shook his head, but I could tell from how his head hung lower that he felt bad. I'll take that as a win. You know the crazy thing? This man is a regular. I see him almost every day. He's not old or particularly lacking in intelligence, just a bit ignorant, I guess. I even have a nickname for him, Shirley Temple. He's usually the guy standing with his hands on his hips like Shirley Temple, waiting for help. Then he switches to the genie pose with his arms folded high. Then he's like Lucille Ball, tapping his foot with folded arms. By now, this guy should know me, but it looks like he's never, ever going to get it.